since abortion was conveniently legalized in the nation of Ireland. In other words, they found a better way, quote unquote, right? They found a better way, a more convenient way to deal with the sin of their parents and the disposal of these quote-unquote inconvenient babies. You know, at one point, it was just hand them off to the nuns, let them toss them into the septic tank. Today, they do it, 500 times more frequently than these nuns were taking care of business in the 1940s and 1950s. So really super, super terrible hypocrisy going on in Ireland today. It's far worse today than it was back then. I somewhat resonate with Enda Kenny's comment that, this was a convenient way to take the babies, sell them, traffic them, starve them, neglect them, deny them to the point of their disappearance from our hearts, our sight, and our country. But wow, that's exactly what these legislators have done with the legalization of abortion in just the last 5 years. And welcome, friends, to the Generations radio broadcast. Kevin Swanson with you. Adam McManus, our host on theworldview.com, is with us this day as we hit some late-breaking stories that I think really need to be out there. Now, one of them is a bit ghoulish, and yet it applies very directly to the problem of abortion in our various states and countries today. It's one of the most interesting stories I think I have seen in years. And it illustrates that there is a blood guiltiness on the hands of men and women. We cannot wash that blood off our hands easily, not certainly without the blood of Jesus Christ. And so the world is concerned with guilt. We are concerned. We can't just cover these things up. They seem to come back to haunt us. And that's precisely what's happened with these babies that were discovered in an orphanage septic system. There's an orphanage in Tuam, Ireland, out by Galway Bay, run by nuns between 1925 and 1961, and apparently 800 babies discovered in the orphanage's septic tank, just recently uncovered. And some of them died of malnutrition, neglect, et cetera, et cetera. There are some records where some 34% of babies died in this orphanage, 1943. 25% of the babies died in 1944. 23% of babies died in 1945. And 27% of the babies died in 1946. Infant mortality rate in the home was 5 times the rate for Ireland in 1950, 65 times the 2012 rate. So evidently there was a serious problem, and this is bothering the conscience of Ireland. I believe the Prime Minister of Ireland has recently issued something of a pardon or a plea for forgiveness on this issue because of the way in which these babies were treated between 1925 and 1961. One Irish politician wrote, "No nuns broke into our homes to kidnap our children. We gave them up to what we convinced ourselves was the nuns' care. We gave them up, maybe to spare them the savagery of gossip, the wink, the elbow language of delight in which the holier-than-thous were particularly fluent. We gave them up because of our perverse, in fact, morbid relationship with what we called respectability. Indeed, for a while, it seemed as if in Ireland, our women had the amazing capacity to self-impregnate." In other words, what he's saying is that there's a lot of guilty parties here contributing to these babies that were born out of wedlock. But he says, for their trouble, we took their babies, gifted them, sold them, trafficked them, starved them, neglected them, denied them to the point of their disappearance from our hearts, our sight, our country, and in the case of Tuam and possibly other places, from life itself. That was a Irish politician by the name of Enda Kenny that said that. But I'll tell you what, Adam, the hypocrisy here just drips. They're trying to cover up something here, but in the process, the babies certainly suffered a great deal from the sins of the parents in these situations.
This was initially discovered, the horror of it, back in 1975 when 2 boys ages 10 and 12 were playing at the site of the former Bon Secours mother and baby home in Ireland. They found a hole or chamber, quote, filled to the brim, end quote, with children's skeletons underneath a concrete slab, which they later determined was the septic tank. One of them later said he had seen about 20 skeletons. Mm-hmm. Now, locals speculated that something was terribly amiss. And, it reminds me of the old movie and play starring Cary Grant of Arsenic and Old Lace. These two ladies, sweet, at least appearing, would take these widowers in, thought they were suffering in some way because they were lonely, and they would put arsenic in their coffee, their tea, their crumpet, whatever it was. They would subsequently die, and they would bury them in their basement. So this contradiction of the arsenic, the poison, and the lace, the appearance of gentleness and grandmotherliness, is the same kind of conflict that we have with a nun orphanage run by nuns, taking in women. By the way, they didn't just deliver these babies in a hospital and then take them in afterwards. They literally were a home for these women. They helped deliver the babies, and through either neglect, malnutrition, a devious determination to end the lives of these babies because they thought they were doing, like Planned Parenthood does today, something noble by putting them out of their misery, being born into a situation where they didn't have a father and a mother in the home. It is equally reprehensible what Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry does today across the globe and here in America, presenting themselves as sophisticated and noble and even righteous when they are profiting from this bloody industry of death and dismemberment.
And no difference, as you said, between Planned Parenthood and what the world has done up to this point. Planned Parenthood presents themselves as the wonderful, thoughtful, kind organization that wants to just help these ladies that find themselves in trouble, and they'll dispense with the babies, and no problem. Now, again, the impression is that the system is taking care of the issue. And the impression is that these are nice old ladies that are helping out the situation. But in the process, we begin to see that life is increasingly considered of no real value. And that's what's happening with Planned Parenthood as well today. Now, Ireland just aborts these children. I believe it's considered to be much more convenient than to dump them off in a nunnery for the babies to be thrown into a septic tank. As of 2023, 10,000 abortions in the Republic of Ireland. 2022, there were 8,200 abortions. In 2021, 4,600 abortions. 2020, there were 6,600 abortions. In 2019, there were 6,700 abortions. And then in 2018, 32 abortions, meaning that just over the last 5 years since the legalization of abortion in Ireland, there's been 36,100 abortions. That's 40 times the number of babies killed in the nunnery orphanage over a period of 50 years. So we're looking at, 400 times the rate of babies getting killed by abortion since abortion was conveniently legalized in the nation of Ireland. In other words, they found a better way, quote unquote, right? I'm keeping better in quotes. They found a better way, a more convenient way to deal with the sin of their parents and the disposal of these quote unquote inconvenient babies. At one point it was just hand them off to the nuns, let them toss them into the septic tank. Today, they do it 500 times more frequently than these nuns were taking care of business in the 1940s and 1950s. So, really super terrible hypocrisy going on in Ireland today. It's far worse today than it was back then. I somewhat resonate with Enda Kenny's comment that this was a convenient way to take the babies, sell them, traffic them, starve them, neglect them, deny them to the point of their disappearance from our hearts, our sight, and our country. But wow, that's exactly what these legislators have done with the legalization of abortion in just the last 5 years.
And I might add that this was not a isolated incident. There was another case in 2010 in Ireland as well, in Dublin, where the bodies of 222 infants from Bethany Home, another maternity home, were found in a mass unmarked grave. Any group of people whether they are religiously affiliated or not, that proclaims their love for babies to open up a maternity home and an orphanage, you would think that that would be the very place where the children would be the most protected, the most safe. But sadly, it wasn't. Just like the womb itself should be the safest place for a child to live, and yet in 1/3 of the cases is savage.
Yeah, and I think the concern that the world has placed upon this, and by the way, this has made NBC, ABC News, People Magazine just came out with another story on this week, as is Fox News. So the major media is concerned about this. Obviously not concerned about the hundreds of millions of babies that are slaughtered and flushed down the toilet. I mean, where do babies typically end up? Where do the aborted babies end up? Well, in the septic tank. It's the same thing is happening with abortion, except, at orders of magnitude more frequently than what was happening in these nunneries back in the 1920s and 1930s, before abortion was legalized in these countries. So again, the hypocrisy just drips. This is one of the most horrendous stories, and still to this day, the major media has no interest whatsoever in the hundreds of millions of babies flushed down into septic systems in our day today, and yet somewhat concerned for these babies that didn't get a proper burial, quote unquote. That seems to be the issue that has got everybody upset. They didn't get the proper burial. There's no markings for their graves, and they are treated effectively as non-humans. Well, that's precisely what's going on with the problem of abortion today. So again, the hypocrisy is absolutely outrageous. And coincidentally, at the same time when this is going on, the BBC just gave this update as of this morning. MPs at the UK ministers of parliament have voted to change abortion legislation to stop women in England and Wales being prosecuted for ending their pregnancy in terms of late-term abortions. So there's an amendment was just approved for approving late-term abortion in the UK and won the support of 379 MPs with 137 against it, meaning it wasn't even close. It was a landslide vote to decriminalize the procedure, the biggest change to abortion laws in England and Wales for nearly 60 years. In other words, England and Wales have turned even more outrageously pro-abortion to be sure that women can abort their child up to the point of birth. Apparently, women who terminate their pregnancy outside the rules, for example, after 24 weeks, would risk being investigated by the police. They wanted to get rid of that so that you could abort a child up to a partial birth abortion in the UK, and that was approved by the MPs by a vote of 379 to 137 just a day or two ago. So again, the hypocrisy is just outrageous. It's more than I think I can handle at this point. Fox News, ABC, NBC, concerned about 800 babies buried in a septic system, but everybody's okay with late-term abortions, the pill, et cetera, cleaning up all that selfishness, self-centeredness. The hypocrisy here is just overwhelming. The hypocrisy is stifling. I can hardly breathe as I think about what our nations are doing today to hundreds of millions of babies. Certainly this nation is up to 15 to 18 million abortions in any given year, counting those abortions caused by abortifacients, the day after pill, and the kill pill by mail program. Be back with more in just a moment on the Generations broadcast.
Of all the events that we do here at Generations, probably one of the most important to our mission of passing on the faith is our annual Father and Son retreats. I'm Danny Craig, National Director here for Generations, sitting with David Braun, longtime Father-Son retreat attendee. David, what's been most impactful for you and your son attending the Father-Son retreats?
Danny, what's been most impactful for me has just been a great excuse to spend time with my son, first and foremost. Everyone's busy. And it's a great way to get away. It's 3 nights long, which gives you a lot of time to just be together. Mm-hmm. That's been the most impactful. And of course, the leadership has been great. They're humble, they're loving, they're kind. They just want to spend time with everyone who comes. And I'd say finally, the camaraderie of hundreds of other fathers and sons who are all in very different places, yet united in their desire to love their families well and their sons well. So we did a bunch of hiking, and it's right in your backyard. You just step out to your room and off you go. There's just miles and miles of trails. The zip line is a ton of fun. And then also just playing games at night, foosball, board games. And again, doing that alongside other fathers and sons has been the best part. It's absolutely worth it. And just realize you're going to learn so much more than you thought. You're going to be blessed in ways you didn't expect. You will absolutely return the following year, I guarantee it.
Friends, join us this year for the Colorado Father-Son Retreat in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, August 14th through 17th, and also a second event, August 21st through 24th, for a great time of teaching, encouragement, fellowship with other dads, and ultimately the opportunity to step away and spend time on this important relationship in your family. Join us. Go to coloradofatherson.com. That's coloradofatherson.com.
And we are back on the Generations broadcast as we review the tremendous hypocrisy represented by the modern age, concerned about 800 babies discovered in a septic tank, buried by nuns from a nunnery. And perhaps part of this is condemning the Catholic Church, whereas washing our hands today of the hundreds of millions of babies that are slaughtered, even to the point of late-term abortions in the UK and Ireland, as well as the United States. But a point we made from the beginning here, Adam, is that there is something of a conscience a concern about the 800 babies, the skeletons of these babies found in the septic system somewhat 50, 60 years later. And it does seem there is still something of a conscience. There is something of a sense of that blood guiltiness. And that being the case, they're throwing a flag on the play, 50, 60 years later?
I'm grateful that the media, the mainstream media, is covering this story. I do see the disconnect that they are clearly not recognizing the savagery of modern day abortion, whether it's surgical abortion or chemical abortion. A dead baby is still a dead baby. But the fact that anyone in the mainstream media that is typically devoid of conscience recognizes the dignity of each child that died a horrific death in Ireland at the hands of Catholic nuns, reveals to me that they are affirming the truth found in Genesis 1:27, that we are created in God's image. And because of that, we have dignity, and because of that, we are worthy of a Christian burial. And I find a glimmer, admittedly just a glimmer, but a glimmer of hope in that recognition that these babies deserved better. They certainly deserved to live, primarily, but if they were killed, they deserved a proper, dignified Christian burial, not to be thrown into the septic tank with urine and poop and toilet paper, which is degrading.
And what in the world is going to happen for the 150 million babies per year that are being slaughtered and flushed down toilets into septic systems today? I'm wondering if 50, 60 years from now, the world will become aware of their own blood guiltiness and then recognize the personalities and the little babies that were created in the image of God that were slaughtered and flushed down into these septic systems in the year 2025. So again, 50 years from now, are we going to see something of a similar approach to handling the babies and the loss of life that has occurred in our generation? So again, given that, it's impossible to just walk away from it, wash your hands and say, hey, this is a non-issue. Apparently, the consciences of the modern cannot handle it when they, come upon the sins of the previous generation. So again, and it may be just simply, casting blame on the previous generation and not willing to admit to our own sins. That may be another aspect of the hypocrisy here. But let's move on to more late-breaking news. A very significant story hit the press this morning, and that is the U.S. Supreme Court has upheld the Tennessee law that banned gender transition care for young people in a decision expected to have a consequence for some 25 other states that have restricted puberty blockers and attempts to transgender young people, teens included. Apparently, 3 Tennessee transgender teenagers, their parents, and a doctor who provides transition medications argue the state's ban violated U.S. constitutional guarantee of equal protection under the law by discriminating on the basis of sex. Well, the decision came down in the favor of the state of Tennessee, which had just passed a law banning gender transition for the young people, and the justices voted 6-3 on this 2023 law. And I think that's significant and an important breakthrough for the conservative position in the year 2025. Evidently, it's going to be a positive for states' rights. They're respecting the Tennessee law, which means that, similar to the reversal of Roe v. Wade, I think the U.S. Supreme Court is going to allow for individual states to make these decisions for themselves.
No one should be surprised that in the 6-3 decision, affirming the ban of gender transition surgeries and puberty blockers for minors, the 3 liberals were Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson. The person who wrote the decision was Chief Justice John Roberts, who said that the law known as SB 1 does not discriminate against transgender people. He said, quote, Tennessee concluded that there is an ongoing debate among medical experts regarding the risks and benefits associated with administering puberty blockers and hormones to treat gender dysphoria, gender identity disorder, and gender incongruence. And so the Tennessee law that banned any procedure that enables a minor to identify with or live as a purported identity inconsistent with their given biological sex is something that should be upheld. The Tennessee ban was right.
Well, now, biblically, how does this hold up? And some people say, well, don't the parents have a right to see that their kids come through some kind of mutilation? Should they be subjected? Should these kids be subjected to mutilation because their parents are fighting for this right? So that's the question here. So biblically, how do we address this? It's ironic, of course, that on the one hand, we ourselves fight for parental rights to allow parents to make decisions relating to vaccinations for their kids, for example. So we want parents to make medical decisions for their children. So in this case, how does this hold up? So we need a biblical answer for this. And my answer, I think, is fairly simple. Parents do not have a right to mutilate their child. Boom, that's it. It's the same reason why parents don't have a right to kill their children. This is a line over which they must not cross, right? Parents do not have a right to murder their child. By the way, the nuns don't either. Whether or not they contributed to the killing of these children, we don't really know for sure. But we do know that there are a lot of parents that consign their children to death by way of the abortionist knife or by way of some horrible chemical that destroys their life. And that, my friends, should be against the law. It's not right for a parent to kill their child. They do not have a right to kill their child. That's a line over which they may not cross. Moreover, they do not have a right to mutilate their child. They must not be allowed to hire a doctor or an assassin or an abortionist to mutilate their own child or to kill their own child. I think that should be obvious, certainly from the lex talionis. In other words, people say, well, on what basis can we say that it is a just decision for the Supreme Court to disallow a parent, a family, to sentence their child to a mutilation or to an abortion, to a murder? And I say Exodus 21:22. And by the way, this law forbids abortion and the use of abortifacient pills as well. It's interesting. It forbids the taking of the life of the child and forbids the mutilation of the child. It's interesting the law applies to both. So Exodus 21:22 is God's law, still in stone. If men fight and hurt a woman with child, so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall surely be punished according as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. But if any harm follows, and the word is a lasting harm, if there's any lasting harm that follows, that is to the child, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, and stripe for stripe. Meaning that this is a civil law that God imposed upon Old Testament Israel, that the child, the concern here is the child, that the woman as well, but the child as well. If the child is hurt, if the child suffers any lasting harm that develops a permanent scar, anything like that, the perpetrator is guilty of a crime. So there you have it, in black and white from God's word. Exodus 21:22-25 is one of the most famous laws in all of legal history. So any lawyer knows about the lex talionis. It goes all the way back. In fact, it's not just in the Word of God. It turns out it's also in the Code of Hammurabi. So it's interesting. It's as old as the hills, and it goes back to God's law, still in stone. Exodus 21.
I would say two things. Number one, the majority of teenagers who are experiencing some kind of gender dysphoria for several months, several years, today brought on by all kinds of foolish curriculum in the schools or social media influencers, 95 to 97% of them over time recognize that while they might have been confused about which gender they prefer to be, and they ultimately resolve, given time, that their gender that God gave them at birth is the gender that they will embrace. And number two, when a parent agrees to participate in the fantasy of their own child, who is by definition not an adult and not really able to make these decisions, and when the parent is an accessory to such foolish, life-altering changes, we need to recognize these are irreversible. They will never be able to have children. And they, I think, are going to be much more prone to suicide in the years following because they will live with such tremendous regret.
This, I think, also is an excellent example of how mere utilitarianism and how things are going to end up, 20, 30, 40 years from now is not going to be a sufficient answer for whether or not the civil magistrates should step in on an issue like this. On the one hand, there's not much we can do if adults or emancipated children who are adults want to self-mutilate themselves. I mean, it's not a whole lot you can do. Yeah, I mean, you can, I can rush into a house and hold back on the knife. Don't do this to yourself. Don't do this to yourself. And then, you leave them, and then 2 days later, they've mutilated themselves again. So there's not a whole lot you can do. Nevertheless, parents that allow for professionals to walk into their children's lives and mutilate them, that, my friends, should be against the law. I mean, on the basis of God's law. It's just right there, plain as day. And we as Christians should take a stand on these issues and point out that there are certain forms of abuse that parents may not engage in for their kids. That includes abortion. It includes attempts to transgender their kids. And if they attempt to do so, they should be prosecuted by the law and by the law of Tennessee or any state for that matter. So that's the biblical law relating to this. And by the way, there are other forms of abuse that need to be prosecuted by the state as well.
I'm grateful for what the Tennessee Attorney General Jonathan Skrmetti said. He said that this is a landmark victory. This is a big win for evidence-based medicine. This is a big win for democracy, for letting state governments decide what state laws should be. And I think we owe a lot of this kind of domino effect of the 25 states that have passed bans on minors getting these transgender mutilating surgeries or getting the puberty blockers, the Supreme Court decision that upheld the ban, to what happened in England, which was really kind of the European leader initially in these so-called gender-affirming care mutilation of minors. And then, since the Cass report, a very comprehensive overview of where have these kids gone, what has happened, what's the long-term implication. It was a very comprehensive report. They recognized that they needed to shut all of this down, that they had made a terrible mistake, and they regretted it in the National Health Service. And that was, I think, the first domino in the West that fell, resulting in an addition to Trump's very reelection into a second term, because so many people were disgusted by the liberals championing these outrageous surgeries on minors. And we appreciated Donald Trump speaking a level of common sense and even affirming it in his inauguration speech, that we are born male and female, which is right back to Genesis.
Well, we're thankful that there's been a step back on the insanity of the age. Let's just say it. This whole transgender thing has turned the entire world into an insane asylum, sadly. And so, yeah, the President of the United States has stepped back on that, and we're thankful also he's taking it out of the military. And also, the fact that the kind of tyranny that was imposed upon so many of these kids in these public schools, in which, parents weren't even informed of their children's railroaded into these transgendered surgeries and treatments in many of these states. And I think that itself is another instance of governmental tyranny that certainly is being stepped back in various states around America today. And the Supreme Court of the United States also, kudos to them for maintaining states' rights. And that's a biggie. The idea that the Supreme Court is turning these decisions back to the states is something of a positive trend in America. Since the reversal of Roe v. Wade, this allows for some islands of freedom. States' rights themselves allows for some islands of freedom in an otherwise rather liberalized, socialized, totalitarian type of world. So in the good providence of God, we're seeing some measure of freedom retained in some states in what we like to call islands of freedom. And so, we're not leaving the world. The God is not leaving the world in a 1984-ish Big Brother sort of totalitarian state condition, but allowing for some protection of those freedoms in some particular states, at least in the United States of America. So that's a positive. That's a positive. We have something of a opportunity for freedom. Now, my idea is we ought to defend the islands as much as we possibly can, with the hope that one day we might be able to take the mainland in some country sometime in the future. So that's the strategy. And I'd recommend to you my book, The Story of Freedom, which spends about a third of the book on our strategy for trying to retain some level of freedom in a totalitarian age. So get a copy of The Story of Freedom, our little paperback book that goes through the history of freedom and then challenges us to the next chapter in defending freedom in this generation and for the next. So get a copy of Story of Freedom at generations.org. This is Kevin Swanson and Adam McManus inviting you back again next time as we continue to lay down a vision for the next generation.